Um, to start, what should be included in a good parenting plan?
So there's core aspects of any parenting agreement. Uh, Typical parenting agreement will include who has physical custody of the child, or if the parties are uh, certainly have the option, pardon me, of sharing custody. Um, should detail uh, parental access, otherwise known as visitation, for the non-custodial parent. Um, uh, should say how pickup and drop offs work, you know, whether father's always picking up from mom's house or picking up someplace else, what happens when the kids are not in school, how does pickup and drop off work, um, what happens in the event of like a snow day or something like that. You should be addressing all that stuff. Um, but other typical things that you can address is, especially if the parties are doing some form of joint custody, you're going to want to address what decisions get decided upon amongst the parties, but then also how that decision process plays itself out. Um, does mom always get final decision making after meaningful consultation? Um, does one party or the other need to trigger a decision process, and how exactly does that get played out? Um, other things are, do the parties, if they disagree on a decision, do they need to go to a professional, such as a doctor or a teacher, a guidance counselor, or something like that, to break the impasse? That's what the attorneys generally call the professional model. That should be addressed as to exactly how that works. Um, those seem to be the core things that are addressed. Uh, there's certainly other details that can be addressed, such as, hey, where do the kids go to school? Are relocations prohibited outside of a certain mile radius? Or, what if somebody moves? Do they necessarily have to go back to court or go to mediation, or how does all that play itself out?
Um, so how can someone begin the process of creating their parenting plan?
Yeah, so you're going to want to usually contact an attorney or mediator. I would not recommend to try it on your own. Um, it can be done, and certainly, uh, if it's a situation where both of you don't have the money to hire an attorney, you're probably just better off filing something in family court, like a custody or visitation petition, getting court assigned counsel, um, and then just having the attorneys that are court assigned negotiate and do the parenting agreement that can then be incorporated into a court order. Um, then that even the family court can refer you out to mediation, so that that process can play itself out, and then the mediator's fees would be court paid. Um, Again, they only waive those fees if you're deemed to be indigent. Um, but if you can otherwise afford counsel, then again, you would either go to a mediator or hire your own respective attorneys to start that process.
How can somebody plan for holidays and special events without complicating their uncontested divorce?
Um, I would say that you want to um, essentially decide how that works. I don't think it would necessarily complicate the divorce, but that does need to usually be addressed in a parenting agreement. So in other words, especially around the major holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving and things of that nature, you're going to want to address like who has the kids on particular days. Um, uh some party, and there's no golden rule on that. There's every family is different. Some families will say, well, dad always goes away, but usually goes away on the weekend before the weekend after Christmas, so it doesn't really matter unless obviously the holiday falls on a weekend. um and then you can even address that in your parenting agreement, like what happens in that instance. um Other parties say, yeah, we're fine with alternating the dates, like mom gets Christmas Eve even years, dad gets Christmas Day even years, and flip flop the next year. um Other families do it where dad gets Christmas Eve every year and mom gets Christmas Day every year. But even in that instance, you have to say, well, how do you define what is Christmas Eve? You don't presumably want an exchange on midnight. So you would have to say, does the exchange take place Christmas Eve night, like at 10 p.m. or 8 p.m. or something like that? Or does it happen the next morning? Usually, in my humble experience, it happens the next morning, but every family is different. And you can structure your agreements differently. But yeah, you really just need to address those issues.
I want to kind of move question 4 later because it'll make more sense. Is that okay with you?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So go into what happens if my spouse and I disagree just on the parenting plan? Can you still salvage like making keeping it an uncontested divorce?
The answer is yes. It's really just a matter of either going back to the mediator or going to your respective attorneys and saying what the impasse is. And whether you're talking to the mediators or the respective attorneys, they should be going over with you um, how they would recommend impasses be reached. Now, the mediator has a limited degree to which they can actually recommend certain avenues. They really, you know, they can basically present you your menu of options, but that's pretty much it. They can't really say, well, this is what's usually done. Like they can't opine like that. But the attorneys can. So that's why oftentimes, if there's impasses like that, you're probably better going to your respective individual attorneys. Um, but if you go to a mediator and or you go to your respective attorneys and you still can't break those impasses, well, then you're gonna have to contest the case.
There, during things, it can kind of people can kind of be focusing on their own emotions. So how do you ensure that the parenting plan focuses on the best interest of the child? If you have tips for that.
Yeah, I think that it depends on the age of the child, obviously. Um, the problem slash issue is mom is always going to see her presentation of what she wants as in the best interest of the child, and vice
Mhm.
versa. Like dad is going to say, well, what I'm saying seems to me to be in the best interest of the child. um the individual attorneys representing the parties are not there to represent the child. So they can't really say, well, hey, the child should come for, like, that, ultimately they're there to zealously advocate for what their client wants. Um, you can certainly, as an individual attorney, you can suggest, hey, especially with an older child, maybe we should insert clauses that defers certain things to the quote unquote preferences of the child. What you should not put into an agreement is deferring decisions altogether to a child. Most likely the judge is not going to be comfortable signing off on that, and or in a later proceeding find that that's an enforceable clause. You're really not supposed to be saying, well, it's up to the child whether they visit the father on the third weekend of every month or not. We'll give the child veto power. It's up to the child whether they go to extracurricular activities that dad signs the child up for. You're really not supposed to be putting in provisions that say that.
Mm. Is it possible for the parenting plan to be modified after the uncontested divorce is finalized?
Sure, absolutely. So, a parenting agreement would be incorporated into a judgment of divorce. So now that's a court order. Um, if circumstances change that warrant changing the court order and in turn the incorporated parenting agreement, then either party can go into family court or Supreme Court. It'll be up to a judge to then look at your application to determine in the first instance whether you've stated a basis or not to modify the agreement. If you haven't, then they have the power to just dismiss your application out of hand with no hearing taking place. But on the contrary, any judge can say, well, you've stated at least facially a basis to modify. As to whether I will do so or not, that requires a hearing or trial to determine on what basis I should modify the agreement.
And do you have any tips to how does somebody account for changes in the children's needs as they get older? Do they go, is it back to mediation or
Um, yeah, they can go back to mediation if they started in mediation. That's oftentimes the recommended approach, especially if they started in mediation and reached an agreement in mediation. Um, Obviously, if they never went to mediation in the first place, then it's up to them whether they do that or not, or just hire their own respective attorneys. Um, you don't always need to go to a mediator or attorney. Sometimes, as the child gets older, sometimes the parties just discuss amongst themselves and make alternate arrangements with the proviso that anything that you informally agree on is ultimately not enforceable. So it's kind of like on the honor system where you just have to trust that the other party will honor your informal agreements. If you want something formalized, that's where you really need to go to mediation, go to hire your own respective attorneys. And then ultimately, if you get a modified parenting agreement, um, uh, you'll still want to go into family court to have a family court judge sign off on it.
um off the top of your head, are you able to share an example of a unconventional parenting plan you helped develop for an uncontested divorce?
Sure, absolutely. So, uh, one agreement that I did most recently involved a nesting situation. So, that's it's certainly done, but I would say it's kind of rare. Um, but basically in this instance, um, the parties owned a marital residence. They didn't want to sell it right away, but they had enough money that each of them could either live with their parents or get a small one bedroom or studio apartment on the days that they were not in the marital residence. And so then they would just do a schedule saying On these days, the father's in the marital residence and taking care of the kids, and on these days, mom's in the marital residence taking care of the kids. Um, and that worked for them. Um, I actually did that several months ago. Haven't heard from them since, so I would assume that everything is working out for them along those lines. Now, obviously, there might come a point at which they want to sell the marital residence, and then things will need to change along those lines. But that's definitely something that can be done.
I mean, no news is good news, in my opinions.
Exactly.
um, and do you? How do you find a balance in situations like that where you have to go between the needs of the children and the parents? How do you find that balance?
Well, so part of it is really well interviewing your own client to understand this is really what I would ideally like. This is the bottom line in terms of what I would be willing to settle for, and kind of approach negotiations from that standpoint. um you know and then obviously hearing from the other side in terms of what they're willing to settle for, and their attorney may also say, well, this is what our quote unquote litigation position would be. In other words, our position if we had to go in front of a judge. um and then see how far apart the parties are on the various issues. Sometimes it's beneficial to have one, two, three, or more four-way settlement conferences, and four-way settlement conferences where the attorneys and the parties will get together in somebody's conference room and try and hash out where the differences are. Nowadays, some parties just opt to do that via Zoom, and that's completely fine. I've done those four-way settlement conferences both ways.
So do you want to do the alternate? Do you think do you think we're good on time for the alternate one, or do you want to put save it for next?
Um, I'm fine with waiting until next time, only because I notice my voice is getting a
I
bit worse and I'm getting stuffed up. Uh,
understand.
could be
Uh,
too much work. Um,
um,
but yeah, I'm fine with waiting till next time.
okay, would you like to get on the schedule in advance right now, or
Sure.
how are you for? Is this usually a good time for you?
Yeah, either yeah, like 2:30, 3 o'clock is fine.
I was gonna suggest Tuesday, March 25th at 3 o'clock. Is that good for you, or 2:30? We can do 2:30 as well.
Yeah, 2:30 actually works a little better. So yeah,
Okay,
that's cool.
yeah, I'll put you down right now.
Okay. Alrighty, it's in my book too.
In
So
my book. So thank you for your time. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
okay,
Yeah,
you,
see you.
you too. Take care. Be well.
Take care.
All right, bye.